The hum of distant boarding calls echoed through Terminal D at Atlanta International Airport. Inside the pristine first-class lounge, everything exuded quiet luxury. Marble counters, soft leather seats, champagne bubbling in tall flutes, and the subtle scent of citrus diffusers wafting in the air. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. A bubble, carefully designed to shield its guests from the chaos outside. That illusion popped the moment she walked in. Her navy blue scrubs stood out instantly in a room full of business suits and designer handbags. Her sneakers, creased, scuffed, squeaked faintly on the polished floor as she stepped inside. A badge dangled from her neck, swinging slightly with each breath she took. Under her eyes, exhaustion. In her posture, quiet strength. She paused by the check-in counter, murmuring something to the receptionist. The staff nodded politely and waved her in. 3 seats away, a sharply dressed woman in her 50s lifted her head. Platinum blonde bob. Impeccably tailored white blazer. A Chanel bag perched like a throne on the seat beside her. She narrowed her eyes behind oversized sunglasses. Her name was Judith, but the internet would soon know her by another name, Karen. She watched the nurse walk past her and take a seat near the window. The woman pulled out a small bottle of water, took a deep breath, and leaned her head back, clearly drained. Karen couldn't take it. She stood, heels clicking aggressively on the tile, and made her way toward the nurse with a performative smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Excuse me," she began, her tone dripping with condescension. "This lounge is for first-class passengers only. You might be looking for the other waiting area, down by gate 31. The nurse blinked, confused. "I know where I am. Thank you." Karen's smile tightened. "It's just, well, people pay a lot for the privacy and comfort here, and your attire isn't exactly standard." The nurse straightened slightly in her seat. "Is there a problem?" Karen's voice rose just enough for the nearby passengers to turn their heads. "It's just unusual to see someone in scrubs here. I assumed you were lost, or maybe visiting someone?" The nurse said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm a passenger." Karen scoffed lightly. "Really? In scrubs? That's a first." A young man seated near the espresso machine lowered his book. A mother with 2 kids paused mid-scroll on her phone. The room was shifting. Still quiet, but attentive. Karen didn't notice, or didn't care. "Look, I'm just trying to help maintain the ambiance of the lounge," she continued. "If the staff won't say something, I will." The nurse remained calm, but something in her eyes changed. She looked up at Karen, not with anger, not with fear, with weariness. "I just finished a 14-hour shift," she said evenly. "I came straight from the hospital. I'm headed home. First class." Karen blinked. "Well, isn't that impressive?" she said with a sarcastic smile. "Good for you." From the front desk, the receptionist shifted uncomfortably. She opened her mouth to intervene, but before she could, Karen took a step forward. "You know," Karen added, dropping her voice as if she were confiding something, "this lounge has standards. Maybe next time. Change clothes before you show up." The nurse turned away. Karen walked back to her seat, smug. Satisfied. But the nurse didn't leave, and she wouldn't need to defend herself, because someone else was about to walk in, and he wouldn't be as quiet. The silence that followed Karen's return to her seat was louder than her voice had been. The nurse remained still, her hands resting on the armrests, knuckles pale. Her name tag, slightly tilted from her earlier movement, read, "R. Thomas." A young barista wheeled by with a tray of croissants and fresh fruit. He paused when he saw the nurse and offered a polite nod. She smiled faintly. He smiled back, then glanced toward Karen. Karen didn't break eye contact. The barista hesitated, then kept moving. From across the room, a man in a charcoal gray suit, maybe early 40s, watched the exchange. He glanced between the 2 women, his expression unreadable. He looked back down at his laptop, tapping absently, then stopped. A quiet sigh escaped him, but he said nothing. No one did. Until security walked in. 2 TSA officers in Navy uniforms stepped through the lounge doors, walking briskly toward the front desk. One of them, a tall older man with a graying goatee, spoke with the receptionist in hushed tones. Karen stood up again. Her voice floated above the silence, laced with rehearsed concern. "I'm the one who called." "Yes, her." She pointed with no shame across the room. "I just thought someone should check." The nurse looked up. For a split second, her eyes locked with the officer's. No fear, just disappointment. The officer looked back at the receptionist. You verified her boarding pass? The young woman nodded. She's booked in 1A, Delta 1. Karen frowned. Wait, 1A? That's a mistake. That's my seat. The receptionist blinked. I believe your boarding pass says 1B, ma'am. Karen flushed. The officer nodded, then turned to the nurse. Ma'am, I'm sorry to trouble you. We just received a report. The nurse stood slowly. Because I wore scrubs in here? The officer hesitated. It's standard to follow up on concerns. The nurse tilted her head. Whose concern? The one who just got caught lying about her seat? Karen huffed. This is outrageous. No, the nurse replied, calm but firm. What's outrageous is assuming that someone doesn't belong because of how they look, or dress, or what color their skin is. The room went still again. The man in the gray suit leaned back, crossed his arms. The barista behind the bar stopped mid-polish of a wine glass. Karen opened her mouth, but the officer raised a hand. Ma'am, you're cleared. Again, I apologize for the inconvenience. The nurse sat back down. Karen stood awkwardly for a moment, then returned to her seat, flustered. She muttered something under her breath that no one quite caught, though everyone heard the tone. The officer whispered something to his partner, and both exited the lounge. But the tension didn't leave with them. It lingered, settled into the cracks of the room like fog. Thick, heavy. The nurse looked out the window. Runways stretched into the horizon. A plane roared in the distance. She inhaled deeply and let it go. Another woman, seated near the complimentary wine station, stood and walked over. She looked like someone's grandmother. Warm cardigan, silver hair pulled into a loose bun. She smiled gently. I'm sorry, she said, placing a hand lightly on the nurse's shoulder. That should never have happened. The nurse nodded. Thank you. She doesn't represent all of us, I know. Karen scoffed audibly. The older woman turned. Do you? Karen looked away. Moments passed. The receptionist at the desk tapped something on her screen. She glanced over at the nurse, then walked toward her with a tray. Miss Thomas, she said, would you like anything while you wait? Tea, coffee, something to eat? The nurse blinked. I'm good, thank you. No charge, the woman added gently. It's the least we can do. Karen stood up again. You're giving her free service now? She snapped. She's already gotten enough attention. The receptionist straightened. Ma'am, the courtesy is extended to all our premium passengers, and Miss Thomas is one. Karen's jaw dropped slightly, but she sat down again. Murmurs rippled across the room now, quiet, restrained. A businessman leaned over to whisper something to his colleague. A woman near the fireplace shook her head. But still, no one directly confronted Karen, because no one wanted to be next. That was the thing about privilege. When wielded like a weapon, it silenced others without them even realizing it. And yet, the nurse never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke volumes. 15 minutes passed. Karen scrolled through her phone, muttering about cancel culture and entitled attitudes. Her voice grew louder again, bouncing off the lounge walls. People are so sensitive these days. You can't even ask a question without being accused of something. I wasn't being racist. I was being observant. I mean, come on, scrubs in first class? Maybe you should be more observant about yourself, a quiet voice said. It came from the man in the gray suit. Karen turned. I beg your pardon. He stood slowly. Not aggressive, just measured. I said maybe it's time to observe the mirror, instead of everyone else. Karen's eyes narrowed. Who even are you? The man smiled faintly. Someone who knows what a hero looks like. He nodded toward the nurse and then turned back to his laptop. Karen didn't reply. Couldn't. The nurse glanced at him. Their eyes met for a moment. A soft acknowledgement passed between them. The lounge remained hushed, but the dynamic had changed. Something was building. Tension. Anticipation. And then the door opened. A man in a tailored navy suit stepped inside. Salt and pepper hair, sharp posture, eyes that had seen battlefields far more complex than this. He didn't look around, he looked straight at her. The nurse, his face lit up with recognition, and that's when the room truly shifted. But that was the beginning. Rebecca Thomas didn't speak, not when the TSA officer approached, not when the woman in white demanded she leave the lounge, and not when a dozen well-dressed strangers turned their eyes toward her, like she was a mistake that somehow slipped through security. She had every right to speak. But sometimes, silence holds more power than words. Especially when you know exactly who you are, and what you just survived. 13 hours earlier. Grady Memorial Hospital, Atlanta. The ER doors slammed open with the kind of urgency that makes trained professionals snap to attention. Paramedics raced in with a stretcher carrying a small girl 10, maybe younger. Her face was smeared with dried blood, and one shoe had fallen off. Her body was limp, too limp. Severe head trauma, car accident. No response since pickup, the medic shouted. Rebecca Thomas, ICU nurse lead, met the gurney halfway through the hallway. "I've got this one," she said, already pulling gloves over her hands. "Let's move." Her voice was steady, commanding. In a room full of adrenaline, Rebecca was the anchor. She'd been on shift for almost 15 hours, hadn't eaten in 8, but none of that mattered, not when a child's life was hanging by a thread. 47 a.m. Code Blue. The girl's name was Avery Langford. She had no ID on her. No parents. Just a crushed backpack with a cracked iPad and a keychain that read, "No one daughter." She coded at 12:42 a.m. The heart monitor flatlined and the room turned to chaos. Rebecca jumped in, chest compressions, 100 per minute. Sweat was dripping down her neck. Her arms ached, but she didn't stop. "Come on, baby girl," she whispered. "You don't get to leave yet." 1 minute, 2, 5. Doctors were already writing the time of death in their minds, but Rebecca wasn't ready to surrender, because this wasn't just any patient. This was her daughter all over again. Flashback. 3 years ago. Rebecca had once sat in the ICU, but on the other side of the bed. Her daughter, Kira, had been born with a rare heart defect. One long, painful battle that ended on a cold January morning when Kira's small heart simply gave up. Rebecca had been holding her, singing softly, pretending it would be okay, even when the machine said otherwise. That was the moment she became something else, not just a grieving mother, but a silent promise. No one else will lose a child on my watch. It's why she transferred from the general ward to the ICU. Why did she work double shifts? Why hadn't she taken a vacation in nearly 2 years? Every code blue felt like Kira's name being called again. Back in the ER, suddenly, miraculously, Avery's heart caught. A flicker. Then a pulse. Then a beep. "She's back," someone yelled. Rebecca didn't smile. She just nodded once and went to work. She monitored vitals, adjusted tubes, calmed the chaos. Only when Avery was stable, breathing, and safely transferred to the pediatric ICU did Rebecca take her first real breath of the night. She looked down at her own hands, trembling from exhaustion. Her scrubs were soaked with sweat, streaked with blood, and still she stayed another 2 hours, charting, calling specialists, making sure everything was ready for the morning handoff, because that's what nurses do. And no one ever applauds for that. 6:30 a.m., the parents arrive. They came in fast. The mother collapsed into tears the moment she saw Avery alive. But it was the father who walked toward the nurse's station, pale-faced, jaw tight, suit rumpled like he'd slept in it. Who was with her when she came in? One of the interns gestured to Rebecca. She saved your daughter's life." The man didn't blink. He just stared at her. Not with fear, not with shock, but with something deeper, grateful, etched into the lines of his face like stone. "What's your name?" "Rebecca Thomas." He repeated it. "Thank you. You don't know what you've done." Then he turned to walk away. Rebecca didn't know who he was. Not yet. 8:52 a.m., Atlanta Airport, Terminal D. Rebecca didn't change clothes. She barely had the strength to shower. She threw her bag over her shoulder, ran a comb through her hair, and got in the rideshare. Her friend, a fellow nurse, had gifted her a Delta One ticket. "Use it," she said. "Sleep, eat, rest, don't argue." So Rebecca used it, still in her scrubs, because after 18 hours of saving lives, she wasn't going to waste energy pretending to be something she wasn't. She walked into the first-class lounge quietly, checked in, found a chair, and exhaled. That's when she showed up, back to present, the lounge. The judgment wasn't new. People had questioned her credentials, her skin, her presence, her role, every step of her life. But what stung wasn't Karen's voice. It was the silence that followed it. The people who looked away, the man who kept typing, the woman who frowned but said nothing. Rebecca knew that silence. It echoed the silence of Kira's heart monitor. She could have spoken up. She could have told Karen about Avery, about the blood still crusted beneath her fingernails, about the father who had repeated her name like a prayer. But she didn't, because she wasn't in that room for Karen. She was in that room for herself. And for the first time in weeks, she just wanted to breathe, so she said nothing. Let the tension sit, let the others wrestle with it, let the weight of their complicity settle on their shoulders. 9:24 a.m., the doors open again. A hush fell over the lounge. The man who walked in wasn't loud. He didn't have to be. Presence radiated off him like heat. Navy blue suit, dark polished shoes, silver streak in his hair. Karen glanced up and straightened, like she'd just seen someone she wanted to impress. The man walked past her, didn't look her way. His eyes locked on Rebecca. "There she is," he said, voice warm, full of something that sounded like reverence. Rebecca stood slowly. She recognized him now. He was Avery's father. Only now she knew his full name. Warren Langford, founder and CEO of Langford Medical. Net worth, 9 figures. One of the most powerful healthcare executives in the country. Karen's mouth fell open. The room went still. And in the silence, Warren smiled at Rebecca and said, "You saved my daughter's life last night." The room had gone utterly still. Not the kind of silence that fills a quiet space, but the kind that crushes it. The kind that presses down on your lungs and demands attention. Everyone in the first-class lounge was watching, waiting, and Warren Langford didn't waste a second. "I've been looking for you," he said, walking toward Rebecca. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind of voice used to give orders to boards of directors, and that is obeyed. Rebecca stood, slightly dazed. "Sir?" Warren reached out and shook her hand with both of his. "You saved my daughter's life last night. I don't even know how to begin thanking you." Karen, still seated 2 chairs away, blinked as if she'd just been slapped. "What?" she muttered, but no one heard her. All eyes were still on Warren and the nurse. "The truth comes out. Her name is Avery," he continued. 10 years old, head trauma, flatlined for over 2 minutes. And yet, when we walked into that ICU this morning, she smiled. "Because of you." Rebecca said nothing. Her face was calm, composed, but behind her eyes exhaustion still lived. Warren turned to the lounge, finally acknowledging the rest of the room. "Let me make something very clear. This woman isn't just a nurse, she's a warrior. She's the reason my daughter is alive today." A murmur rippled through the room like a ripple in glass. Karen stood abruptly. I didn't know," she stammered. "No one said who she was, she just walked in." "In scrubs?" Warren cut her off, eyebrows raised. "Yes, I mean this is the first-class lounge. We're expected to maintain a certain atmosphere, standards." "Ah," he said, nodding. "So the standard is, if someone doesn't look like they belong, we assume they don't?" Karen's lips tightened. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Warren's voice sharpened just a little. Not angry, just surgical. "Because it seems to me that you decided who this woman was based on what she wore, not what she had done, not who she is." He turned fully to Karen now. "Let me ask you something. If she were in a designer pantsuit with heels and a Birkin bag, would you have offered her water or tried to have her removed?" Karen's face flushed. "Look, I just thought." "You didn't think, you assumed. And when you assume, people get hurt." A room divided. The receptionist at the front desk stepped forward slightly, clearly uncomfortable but emboldened. "I tried to stop it," she said quietly. "I verified her ticket, told the officers, but she trailed off." No one blamed her. She was young, caught between policy and confrontation, but her voice was one more needle in the balloon that had been floating too high for too long. Warren nodded at her. "Thank you for trying." He looked back at Karen. "I want you to understand what you nearly did. This woman just came off a shift saving children's lives. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and she was traveling home probably for the first time in weeks. You looked at her and didn't see a miracle worker. You saw someone to manage, someone to remove." Karen was shaking now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Warren stepped closer. "I don't want your apology." Karen flinched. "I want your understanding. I want you to realize that people like her don't owe you an explanation. They've already paid their dues. In blood, in sweat, in silence. Every time they walk into a room, they're judged by people who've never held a dying child, never stood between a family and grief. And yet, they carry that weight like it's nothing." The lounge responds. A man near the fireplace stood up. He looked to be in his 60s, with a walking cane and a veteran's cap. "I've seen what nurses go through," he said. "Vietnam, 1969. We had a medic named Annalise. She saved more men than bullets ever could. No one ever thanked her. She went home to silence and stares. He nodded toward Rebecca. You shouldn't have to explain yourself. Not here, not anywhere. A young woman with a toddler stood next. My son was in the NICU for 3 months. Nurses were the only reason I didn't lose my mind, or my child. One by one, people began to speak. No shouting. Just truths. Small stories. Big realizations. Humanizing the uniform Rebecca wore like a second skin. Karen sat down slowly. Her legs couldn't hold her anymore. The offer Warren turned back to Rebecca. I don't want to just thank you, he said. I want to do something more. She tilted her head. My foundation, Langford Health Impact. We fund scholarships, housing, and mental health for healthcare workers. We've been looking for someone to help us lead a new initiative, one created by nurses for nurses, someone who's walked the halls, seen the faces, fought the battles. Rebecca froze. I don't have a PhD, she said quietly. You don't need one, Warren replied. You have something more valuable, lived truth. Rebecca blinked, stunned. He continued. I'd like to offer you a seat at the table. Salary, benefits, your team. I wasn't expecting. I know, he said gently, and you can say no, but I hope you won't. Karen's exit. Karen stood again, this time quietly, her body smaller than it had seemed before. I'll go, she said softly to no one in particular. I was wrong. Warren turned to her one last time. You weren't just wrong, he said. You were loud and wrong, and if no one had spoken up, you would have walked away thinking you were right. She swallowed hard. Learn from it, he finished. Then he turned away. Karen gathered her bag and left. No one stopped her. No one waved. Redemption in silence. Rebecca didn't take the job right away. She went home, slept for 2 full days, woke up to find her story all over social media, not because she posted it, because someone in the lounge had. The caption read, they tried to humiliate her in public, but life had already crowned her in private. The video had 6.2 million views by sunrise. Her hospital sent flowers. Warren called again, and this time, she said yes. Not because she needed the recognition, but because she knew other nurses like her would still walk into rooms like that. Still be judged, still be quiet, unless someone spoke louder. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Thomas Initiative launched, a national program that trained leadership skills for nurses and awarded monthly scholarships to those working in underserved communities. Rebecca Thomas took the stage at the first ceremony in New York, wearing a dark blue blazer over a pair of sneakers, creased, scuffed, and proud. As she stepped to the microphone, someone in the crowd shouted, "Thank you for what you did." Rebecca smiled. "No," she said, "thank you for finally listening." And the room stood, and the room clapped, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. The funny thing about going viral? You don't hear it coming. One moment, you're sitting in a first-class lounge, just trying to get home. Next, your name is trending. Your inbox is full of journalists. Your hospital calls to say the mayor wants to shake your hand. Rebecca Thomas didn't ask for any of that. She didn't want her face on a video, didn't want applause, she just wanted to go home. But the world had watched something unfold in that lounge. Something uncomfortable, something true, and something is needed. The story that wouldn't die. By the time she landed in San Diego, the clip had over 2 million views. By dinner, it had 5. Strangers were calling her a hero. Some called her an angel, others just said thank you. But Rebecca didn't feel like a hero. She felt seen. For the first time in years, someone had looked past her scrubs and noticed the soul inside them. And that, more than the applause, was what made her cry. When Warren called again, a week after the incident, Warren Langford called again. His voice was warm but firmer this time. "We need you, Rebecca," he said. "Not just to lead a program, but to represent something bigger." Rebecca hesitated. "I'm not a politician. I'm not a CEO. I'm just a nurse." "No," Warren said gently. "You're the woman who stood tall in the face of judgment, who stayed quiet with dignity while the world shouted. That's leadership." So she said yes. The Thomas Initiative begins. 2 months later, the Thomas Initiative launched in partnership with hospitals across the U.S. The mission? To recognize frontline workers, to protect them, to elevate them into leadership positions. And at the center of it all, Rebecca Thomas. Still in scrubs, still working shifts, still the same woman who once sat quietly in a first-class lounge, too tired to argue, but never too tired to save a life. 1 year later. At the National Healthcare Summit in Chicago, Rebecca took the stage in front of 2,000 people. Doctors, nurses, executives, students. She stood behind the podium in the same navy blue scrubs, this time clean, pressed. Paired with a small silver pin over her heart, Avery's initials etched in gold. She looked out at the crowd and began. "A year ago I was told, without anyone saying the words, that I didn't belong in the room. I didn't have the right outfit, I didn't have the look, I didn't have the presence, but I was already someone's hero. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You don't need to prove yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't need to dress up your worth for it to matter. You only need to remember that you are enough, exactly as you are." She paused. The room was silent, and then it stood, not for drama, not for sympathy, but because they finally saw her, not just as the nurse who saved a child, but as the woman who taught the world how to respond with grace in the face of ignorance. A final moment, after the speech, the young woman approached her, mid-20s, eyes wide with admiration. "Miss Thomas," she said, "I'm applying to nursing school because of you." Rebecca smiled gently. "You don't have to be me," she said. "You just have to be ready for the moments that matter." "And how do you know when they matter?" the girl asked. Rebecca leaned in. "They always matter, that's the secret." This story wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about humiliation, it was about recognition. That sometimes the person you overlook is the one holding the whole world together behind the scenes, that the loudest people aren't always the wisest, and that dignity has a way of outlasting everything else. In the end, Karen left with embarrassment, Rebecca left with respect, and the world walked away with a lesson. Never underestimate the power of someone who shows up, especially when they're tired, unrecognized, and still choose to lead with grace.